The following program, NORML Show Live, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate for the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate or encourage any illegal activity and advise all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws by visiting norml.org, NORML.org. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers of NORML Show Live are their own and do not necessarily reflect the philosophy and policies of NORML. Listener discretion is advised.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws presents NORML Show Live, Marijuana Nation. Now, here's your host, NORML's Outreach Coordinator, Radical Russ Belville.
Good afternoon, tokers and tokettes. Welcome. It is Wednesday, May 25th, 2011, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thanks for joining us here for this next couple of hours of news, talk, interviews, information, music, comedy, and more by, for, and about the cannabis community. Our first hour's podcast as the NORML Daily Audio Stash, available on iTunes and on demand at our blog at stash.norml.org. Also joining us here in the studio is our engineer, Ganja John.
What's up, Russ?
Apparently my headphone connections.
Yeah.
Another one of these days where right before we go on air, we're running around like crazy trying to make it all work. But we're here. We made it. That's the beauty of live radio. Also joining us from our virtual studio in Grastoria, Oregon is Cannabis Carrie.
Hello, everyone. How are you today?
Oh, we're doing fine, Carrie. I'm glad you've come up with a standard measurement. I see this in the chat room here.
That's right. I love to roll joints. You know that. And I rolled a bunch, and I was seeing how, symmetrical they were. And they pretty much every one of them weighs 0.7 grams.
0.7 grams. And you know the DEA, and whenever they have those scare stories and they hold up the bag of weed, they go, "This is enough weed for 130,000 joints," or whatever they say, right? They're always measuring that at 0.4. So you're not like rolling bombers or anything. Are these just like normal cigarette-looking joints?
Yeah, I kind of roll fatties a little bit.
I roll
they're pretty
like
general.
I roll like 0.9s on a regular basis. That's what they always seem to come out to, and they don't seem that big.
Well,
have you seen a Marlboro lately? They're pretty big.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well, Cannabis Carrie brings us our hemp headlines right after the first break. So what do we got in the news today?
Well, yesterday we covered a story, and I promised I would let you know if there's any updates. The jury was out for just a few hours, and I'll give you an update on how that went over. Also, a doctor in Michigan is in a little hot water over some pre-signed certificates. And Jan Brewer, the governor of Arizona, doing her best to put the brakes on the program down there. We're going to tell you all about that as well.
Oh, yeah. Governor Brewer is also going to be the subject of my radical rant here at the end of the show today. I got a few things to say about her interpretation of the law. Also, in the hemp headlines, I'm going to follow up with a video from Philadelphia NORML. U.S. Representative Chaka Fattah from one of the districts there in Pennsylvania is on film supporting marijuana decriminalization at their Philly NORML marijuana march. They just produced a great video that it features him. It also features our own Chris Goldstein as well. So we'll show you 3 or 4 minutes of that at the end of the news. Then also we've got our Irie Wednesday. It's not Thursday yet. We got Irie Wednesday music from Perfect with I Smoked a Spliff. And then for our cannabis science, Dr. Mitch Earlywine has the day off, and we're going to play some information from our NORML National Conference. It's a presentation by California NORML's director, Dale Geringer, on cannabis and driving safety. This has always been very controversial subject. You'll learn all about the science from Dale Geringer here, what the science says about you smoking and driving. And again, at the end, a radical rant on Governor Jan Brewer in Arizona. Plus plenty of stuff in hour 2. Stick around. It's NORML Show Live.
You're listening to NORML Show Live, the voice of the marijuana nation.
In today's busy world, we're inundated by advertising for all types of pharmaceuticals that come with a laundry list of potential side effects. Shouldn't you have better medical choices? Natural alternatives to pills pushed by Big Pharma? At Alternative Medical Choices, you could choose natural, safe, and effective alternative therapies that are right for your budget without nasty side effects. Cannabis, or marijuana, has been a legal medicine in the Pacific Northwest since 1998. Our doctors will help determine your qualifications for a medical marijuana recommendation in Oregon, no matter where you live. Our massage therapists will ease your aches and stress with soothing hemp seed oil or cannabis-infused massage salves. We also offer acupuncture, Reiki, and other alternative health therapies. Call Alternative Medical Choices in Portland, Oregon at 503-288-5579 or visit our website at www.altmedchoices.com. We specialize in out-of-state recommendations. That's www.altmedchoices.com or call 503-288-5579.
As High Times Senior Cultivation Editor, I'm often called into the field and asked to sample or even identify exotic strains of marijuana in their natural habitat. Now, for the first time, I've compiled more than 120 of my favorite strains into this single field guide designed to fit into your pocket as you travel the world in search of your favorite plant. From a friend's closet grow room to the wilds of Northern California, this single guide covers all of today's best-known strains, plus heirlooms and throwbacks, including High Times quality photos and information on each variety's genetic heritage and growing characteristics, plus my personal notes on aroma, flavor, and potency. So this is Danny Danko, author of the official High Times Field Guide to Marijuana Strains, wishing you good times and great ganja.
The official High Times Field Guide to Marijuana Strains is available at hightimes.com and finer bookstores.
Medical marijuana, industrial hemp, consumer cannabis. It's time for this week's NORML News with Cannabis Carrie.
This is an update from our story from yesterday. A California couple connected to a Temecula dispensary in California was convicted yesterday of cultivating marijuana and child endangerment. We brought you the story of William and Mary Bunn, who are facing cultivation charges, along with willfully endangering the health of a child, their toddler son. The Bunns were facing a felony child endangerment charge, but were acquitted of that, but were convicted of a lesser child endangerment charge. William Bunn was also convicted of possessing a firearm within 10 years of a prior firearm conviction. The couple was found with 79 marijuana plants in a detached garage on their rural property and were convicted in spite of a local medical marijuana co-op owner testifying in court that the plants were his and he was the only one with the key to that garage. And besides all that, the Bunns were in the process of submitting paperwork to belong to the co-op. There was a scant 2.05 grams of marijuana and one glass pipe found inside the home. The couple's son, who was 22 months old at the time of the arrest back in August of 2008, was taken from the couple for several months. The couple is scheduled for sentencing on July 8th at a Palm Springs courthouse, and if both parents have to serve time, they may lose custody of their now 4-year-old son. They could each get 7 years in prison for the crime.
Oh, man, what a sad update this is. You know, child endangerment because you're growing plants. It's just amazing that that's even a consideration, that the cultivation of a plant is something that we could consider something that is harmful to a child, especially when, even if you took the worst case scenario, suppose the child got to the plant, picked buds off of it, and somehow managed to smoke them or eat them. It's non-toxic. It is not going to cause a lasting harm to the child, even in that worst case scenario. But with these people, we're talking about them locking it up in a barn outside of the house, way away from where the kid can possibly get into it. It's ridiculous to consider that child endangerment. Of course, it's just as ridiculous to consider the cultivation and use of the plants a crime in the first place. This is the crazy way that we tear apart justice in this country, trying to go for that basic idea that the government has some right to dictate to us what we do, what crops we grow, and how we might use them, so long as we're not harming others. And this is just another tragedy. I always hear these people talking about, what about the children? What about the children? Well, here we have a child who's been away from their parents, 4 years old, been away from the parents most of their life, been taken away by child custody, child services and such. And now if the parents go to prison for 7 years, that 4-year-old ends up in foster care for the next 7 years, or orphanages or something like that, and doesn't get a chance to meet their parents out in the free world until they're 11 years old. What kind of effect do you think that has on a child? What about the children indeed? Let's stop breaking up families for the silly crime, so-called crime, of growing and using marijuana. Let's keep families together and let them use a safe, non-toxic herb. This is insane, it is unjust, and it's got to end now.
A Detroit area doctor has had her license suspended and stands accused of selling the documents needed to get a medical marijuana card in the state of Michigan. Authorities are saying that Dr. Lois Butler Jackson issued hundreds of pre-signed medical marijuana physician certificates that were later sold by a business associate. At the time, she was working as a home care physician for Sentinel Wound Care in Clinton Township. The Attorney General for Michigan, Bill Schuette, and the Director of the state's Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, Stephen Hilfinger, have filed an administrative complaint against the doctor. As of yesterday, her license to practice medicine is suspended for 10 days while they hold a hearing to determine whether the 50-year-old doctor's medical license will be permanently suspended. In the state of Michigan, for an applicant to be protected under the law for using medical marijuana, they are required to have a physician complete a full assessment of their medical history. The Clinton Township Police investigated the allegations against Butler Jackson between November of 2010 and February of this year. Undercover officers are alleging that they purchased completed application packets with the certificate signed by Butler Jackson without ever meeting her in person or having her review their medical records. Brian DeLuce is the person suspected of buying the pre-signed certificates from Butler Jackson. DeLuce, who is 33, is a licensed medical marijuana caregiver who allegedly sold the cards for $250 each from his appliance store in Warren, Michigan, according to investigators. DeLuce may also be in trouble. Officers say that they bought marijuana from him at his appliance store as well, but he did instruct new patients to come back in 20 days to purchase marijuana after they received their packet, which is what the undercover officers said they did. The state has 20 days to process your application, after which your original paperwork is sufficient to buy medical marijuana. So far, DeLuce has not been charged in a crime, and he is saying there is no truth to the accusations from the state. Butler Jackson allegedly received $100 from DeLuce for each new registration packet and $50 for each renewal. Police say that Butler Jackson sold $20,000 to $30,000 worth of pre-signed cards to DeLuce. According to the Detroit Free Press, she is the first physician to have her medical license suspended in connection with Michigan's marijuana law that was passed by voter initiative in 2008.
Yeah, so we have thousands and thousands of patients and caregivers and thousands of doctors who are abiding by the law, following the rules and regulations, and it only takes one of these types of cases to make it to the headlines to have the people of Michigan start to doubt what's going on with medical marijuana. I get so tired of this, of the people trying to take advantage of these laws, going around the laws that are crafted. When we make these medical marijuana laws, we enter into this implicit trust relationship with the public. You know, we said, no, it's about health care. It's about taking care of sick people. It'll be well regulated. We'll have doctors and everything. And then when something like this happens, we lose credibility. The people begin to doubt us. It's these bad apples that are going to spoil the bunch. And it further points out why we may have gone as far as we can go, in the public's mind at least, with medical marijuana. Yes, we continue to see more medical marijuana states, but we continue to see it getting more restrictive and keeping it within certain conditions and having dispensaries and no home grow. Is continuing to go that way because they see abuses like this. What they've got in Montana, where they want to have 2 doctors sign off on your pain, is because of abuses like this. So we need to move forward with adult licensing and regulation for all users, even the healthy people, because until that happens, the laws of supply and demand are going to dictate that someone will take advantage of the loopholes. Someone will go around the law to try to make a profit to supply that 90% of demand out there that are healthy people. Legalize for everyone, and then all all the problems of medical marijuana are magically wiped away.
The Republican governor of Arizona said that her state will file a court action this week to make sure that Arizona's medical marijuana program is legal. Governor Jan Brewer is putting the law that was passed by voters last November to the test in what she calls an effort to seek clarification and protect state workers and patient consumers from possible prosecutions from the federal government. The Arizona medical marijuana program was all set to be implemented, but Governor Brewer says that she wants the program plans to be put on hold as the state files a federal lawsuit to find out whether state employees regulating the program would face prosecution. The governor is reacting to a May 2nd letter, one of many that went to states with active medical marijuana programs from the feds, that warned that states with dispensaries may face prosecution from the Justice Department if they were following state law. Arizona's letter from U.S. Attorney Dennis Burke said that his office, quote, will continue to vigorously prosecute individuals and organizations that participate in unlawful manufacturing, distribution, and marketing activity involving marijuana, unquote. He made no mention of state employees. The letter was similar to other letters from U.S. state attorneys in Colorado, Washington, Vermont, Rhode Island, Maine, California, and Montana. Brewer maintains that she wants to follow voters' wishes, but she is concerned and says she won't stand aside while state employees and Arizona citizens acting in good faith are put at risk. In her prepared statement released yesterday, she added that clarity and judicial direction are in order on the matter. At a press conference, she said that the letter muddied the waters, and she intends to get answers before going forward, since people's lives and careers are at stake. The state has already been accepting applications from people that want to use medical cannabis legal in the state. So far, 3,696 people have been approved to use medical marijuana in the state of Arizona for a range of medical conditions. Applications for dispensaries were set to begin the acceptance process on June 1st. Under the Arizona Department of Health and Service rules, 125 dispensaries will be allowed in the state under the new law. The dispensaries were set to begin operating by September of this year, a date that will likely get pushed back with the new development from Governor Brewer. The governor said that Brewer wants to put the dispensary part of the law on hold pending a decision on the legal case, a process that can take months or even years to work out. The state attorney general, Tom Hone, will file the lawsuit in a federal court seeking a declaratory judgment about the legality of Arizona's medical marijuana program. Should be interesting.
Yeah, I got plenty of stuff to say about this, but we're going to save it for the Radical Rant at the end of the show. We got some video here to show you here from Philadelphia NORML, and it begins at the Philadelphia Marijuana March that took place earlier this month, and the video starts with U.S. Representative Chaka Fattah, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, voicing his support for marijuana legalization.
I think it should be decriminalized for all the reasons that we know. First of all, the notion that we would be incarcerating people at this age for the use of marijuana doesn't make any sense. We already imprison more people per capita than any country in the world.
It's a very expensive process in the criminal courts of Philadelphia. So now you're still arrested, you're still booked. To the average offender, the difference between this year and last year really is expensive.
It's not the severity of punishment that changes behavior, it's the certainty. It seemed like a more logical, rational, and efficient way to handle those cases.
About 80% of people arrested for marijuana possession are black. Can you kind of explain that?
Well, I really can't. I mean, that's something you have to talk with police maybe about their activity and who gets arrested.
And the Philly Police Department refused to comment on the video.
But for the average person, they feel strongly that marijuana should be legal.
But for medical, I could understand.
So why is this so difficult to get anything passed in Pennsylvania?
Well, Pennsylvania's a Quaker state.
And do you think that it should be considered a civil rights issue, given that more blacks are disproportionately incarcerated?
I don't know about that. Okay. That's another subject.
I think that the substantive argument is a much better one than to compare it in any way, shape, or form to the challenges that African Americans have faced and what we call the civil rights movement. All right?
This so-called war on drugs, which I relate to as a war on people, is a civil rights issue. Huge civil rights issue.
While supporting marijuana as a civil rights issue remains controversial, legalizing it for medical purposes has been gaining momentum. A month ago, 4 Pennsylvania state senators introduced a bill that would make marijuana legal for medical purposes.
New Jersey has legalized medical marijuana. Delaware has now legalized medical marijuana. So Pennsylvania is a little bit left out in the middle of those two states.
I've been using medical marijuana 17 years now. When I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease, I came off of 300 milligrams of morphine, no problem. I've been using cannabis now. It's an anti-inflammatory, it's an anti-spasmodic, and for Crohn's disease, it does wonders.
And the only nausea medications they have are pills. So somebody's retching on the floor, they can't get up, and you tell them, hey, feel better, swallow this pill.
What do you think about a break?
I think a break is a good thing, and we'll let this video run through. You can still see it on the screen. You can watch the entire video at our blog, stash.normal.org. Back with Irie Wednesday.
It's 20 after the hour, and we have to take a short break, if you know what I mean. Please support these sponsors who support Normal Show Live.
Oh, have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would sell you South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
The world's greatest cannabis competition is coming back to the Bay Area. Over 100 strains of medical marijuana will go head-to-head to see who's the dankest in California. Indicas, sativas, hybrids, concentrates, edibles, plus THC, CBD, and CBN testing. The High Times Medical Cannabis Cup, June 25th and 26th at the Concourse Exhibition Center in San Francisco. It's gonna be awesome. Get your tickets at medcancup.com.
Law420.com. Hello, I'm Russ Belville, Outreach Coordinator for NORML. In my job, I read literally hundreds of headlines each month involving nonviolent, productive citizens whose lives are ripped apart by a marijuana or drug arrest. Many citizens could avoid arrest by refusing police searches and remaining silent, but police are well trained to confuse and intimidate. That's why you have a right to speak to an attorney before answering any police questions. I hope you never need to exercise that right, but if you do, make your first call to the law offices of John C. Lucy IV. John Lucy is an accomplished criminal defense attorney with expertise in Oregon's medical marijuana law. John Lucy understands and respects cannabis and drug consumers of all backgrounds. Call John C. Lucy IV at 503-227-6000 or visit in downtown Portland. Address available at law420.com. That's John C. Lucy IV at 503-227-6000 or visit law420.com today.
It's time for your daily Toker Tunes, the best in 420 friendly music from all genres that uplifts, entertains, and informs the public. Today we get tunes for Irie Wednesday, our celebration of that mellow vibe we find in the best of reggae, ska, calypso, and Latin music. If you'd like to submit your song to be played on Normal Show Live, send it to us at stash@normal.org. Now here's some more great independent marijuana music for today's daily Toker Tunes.
Hey, we got some special Daily Toker tunes today. Ganja John's going to handle this one. He brought something and also has a tune for hour 2 as well. We can't play it during hour 1 yet. It's so super secret.
Yeah.
Hush, hush.
Super secret. Released early just for us.
Yeah, stay tuned for hour 2 to get that. But for hour 1 here, we turn things over to Ganja John for Irie Wednesday. What do we got?
This is a band called Perfect. I know almost nothing about them. But I do know that they can write a hell of a Katy Perry parody.
Okay.
So that's what we're going with today. I Smoked a Spliff.
Excuse me while I light it. I smoked the spliff and I like it. This little song I got to write it. It felt so good, it felt so right. I was smoking ganja all night. I smoked the spliff and I like it. Nothing else can compare to my marijuana. Oh, I keep longing just to see the ganja farmer speeding 120 on the highway while smoking in the breeze. That day, thank God it's Friday. Never so good, it feels so right. I was smoking ganja all night. I smoked a spliff and I like it. I got this lovely piece of fish from my neighbor. Let's smoke some weed together, girl. Taste the flavor. Marijuana makes you so high, until you feel like you wanna fly. So happy you're a part of my life. Oh me, oh my. I smoke the spliff and I like it. Excuse me while I light it. I smoke the spliff and I like it. It's a little song I got to write it. It feels so good, it feels so right. I was smoking ganja all night. I smoke the spliff and I like it.
Toker Tunes at the Stash blog by surfing to stash.normal.org and choosing Media, and then Toker Tunes from the main menu.
Starfish Designs, makers of the original Gandalf.
I'm Radical Russ, and when I want to relax, I always have my 17-inch long original Gandalf from Starfish Designs nearby. The hand-blown borosilicate glass is strong and easy to clean, and the design is sleek and sophisticated. Starfish Designs are available from Bend, Oregon at a glass retailer near you. For locations, call 541-788-GLASS. That's 541-788-4527.
This is NORML Show Live.
We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years. They got mandatory sentences, and these judges just say, they throw up their hands and say, there's nothing we can do with mandatory sentences. We've got to take a look at what we're considering crimes.
When the Reverend Pat Robertson from television's The 700 Club,
criminalizing marijuana, criminalizing the possession of a few ounces of pot and that kind of thing, I mean, it's just...
makes more sense on the marijuana issue than the President, the Congress, and the Supreme Court.
It's costing us a fortune, and it's ruining young people. The young people go into prisons, they come out, they go in as youths, and they come out as hardened criminals, and it's not a good thing.
You know we're winning.
Yo, what's good? This is Be Real of Cypress Hill chilling on NORML Show Live. Legalize it.
It's time for NORML Show Live's Cannabis Science with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York in Albany and the author of Understanding Marijuana. Now here's your dose of cannabis science.
Well, folks, Dr. Mitch has the day off today, and it's well-deserved. He joins us just about every week here and does it as a volunteer, and we're so glad to have him. And so a well-deserved week off as we get here close to the Memorial Day weekend. So in his place, I'm going to give you another look at cannabis science, this time from Dale Geringer of California NORML, and he's been studying the statistics and the studies on cannabis and driving safety. He put this together in a presentation that he presented at the NORML National Conference last month. It's about 20 minutes here and tells you everything you'd ever want to know about cannabis and driving. We turn things over now to Dr. Dale Geringer.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, marijuana and driving, as we know, is actually a very hot issue. It was one of the leading concerns that was expressed by our opposition in the Prop 19 campaign. Comes up all the time when you're discussing marijuana legalization. Now, I'm going to try to show you why concerns about an epidemic of casualties from marijuana, from stoned drivers, are highly exaggerated. But I would remind you of what the very first federal drug czar, Harry Anslinger, said, that legalizing marijuana would mean slaughter on the highways. Most of what Mr. Anslinger ever said about marijuana was wrong. I'm going to try to convince you of the same thing, but first I'm going to have to come up with a disclaimer, especially at this conference. Let me say at the outset, marijuana does have proven adverse effects on driving skills. Studies, and there have been a lot of them, show that marijuana can impair concentration, reaction time, especially complex reaction time where you have decisions to make, peripheral vision, steadiness of speed and distance, decision-making skills, other driving skills in general. And there's a lot of evidence that shows this. The graph here shows results of a meta-analysis that was done by a fellow named Berghaus, who looked at all of the studies that had been done of people on driving skills under the influence of marijuana. Most of these studies were actually driver-simulated studies or laboratory studies, not so much on the road. Lots and lots of studies, 761 studies. And the analysis shows that over 50% of those 761 studies showed impairment from THC. Only 3 studies showed any improvement whatsoever. So those of you out there who insist that marijuana makes you drive more safely, there's not a lot of evidence out there to back you up. There is this graph shows the time progression of marijuana impairment. You can't read the scale too easily, but it's a time scale going up to about 2.5 hours there, and the vertical bars are the percentage of subjects who fail a test. And you'll see that at about 20 to 40 minutes, the second set of bars from the left, 70% of the subjects showed, 70% of the tests showed impairment at 20 to 40 minutes. And then that percentage sort of declines. And then after 2.5 hours, and this is not on the chart there, there are some minor measurable effects that are not of a whole lot of concern. And after 4 hours, nobody can really find anything. But this first 2.5 hours, and especially these 20 to 40 minutes, are a concern. So with this concern in mind, how are we going to, measure this? How is law enforcement going to detect it? Well, of course, a lot of people talk about drug tests. So let us move on and look at the technology there. Now, I don't have to tell this group this, but urine tests, the most popular form of drug testing that we have nothing to do with impairment. The reason being simply that marijuana tests in the urine test positive for days after use. And it's very hard to relate that to any temporary degradation of driving skills. And this shows the results, shows how how users will test positive for marijuana at significant levels in urine for up to 70 days in this particular survey. So really, most safety experts realize this fact that urine analysis is no way to measure impairment, despite the fact that we have Department of Transportation rules that require mandatory drug testing of all our truckers and transportation workers. There's really no evidence to show that the urine tests have anything to do with their present impairment. Less known, and this is something that I always find useful to throw out at my enemies, is that urine tests don't even show when you're very stoned, because your urine doesn't turn positive until a few hours after you actually smoke. So if you're clean and then get plastered, it can still be 2, 4, or 6 hours before any of the metabolite actually gets into your urine. Well, as we said before, the most dangerous time is the first 2 hours. You're not even positive then. Which I think this highlights what a wrong-headed technology urine testing is when it comes to detecting impairment. So what do people turn to? And what kind of tests do we have? Well, the standard that everyone looks at now is blood tests, because blood tests actually detect the presence of active THC in your bloodstream. And this tends to be highly responsive to recent use. Now, the graph here, the blue line shows the level of THC that appears in your blood after smoking marijuana. There's a time scale there. I guess the whole thing goes out for a few hours here, but that peak is very, very brief. It's a few minutes, really. Very sharp peak that declines, and after an hour or two, it goes down to much lower levels. The peak is, in this case, this is an average of many subjects, was over 100 nanograms per milliliter. That's high. If you see 100 nanograms per milliliter, chances are the person smoked really recently. But it tails off, and then after a few hours goes down to these minimal levels of between 1 and 3 nanograms per milliliter, and that can persist for many hours, and in fact, in the latest studies, up to 6 days in chronic users, you can see levels from 1 to 3 nanograms residual THC in blood. Now, some states have 0 THC in blood standard, but as you can see, that would again be detecting usage, possibly days after it's actually happened. However, if it's above 3 nanograms, there's probably been recent use. Now, there's another hooker in this that makes it more complicated. The red line down there shows what happens if you take an oral dose of marijuana, and that's much different. You do not get a peak at all. You get this low, broad plateau of somewhere from 5 to 10 nanograms. Now, that's again above that 2 to 3 that I said is common residually, but it's not that high compared to the peak that you see. So and you can be much more stoned with, showing 5 or 6 nanograms in your blood because you ate a brownie than you might be for having taken a few puffs of a joint and registering at, 100 nanograms, which illustrates my point that blood THC does not track the actual subjective effects of marijuana. Why is this the case? Well, because the effects of marijuana occur on the receptors in your brain. There's no way of measuring the amount of marijuana in your brain receptors. What we're looking at here is marijuana in the THC in the blood. It takes a while to get out of the blood and into your brain. We don't get, I don't think, does anybody get just like an orgasm when they smoke a puff? And that's what this blue peak looks like. That's not the way we normally experience smoking marijuana. So this is only a rough correlation to anything that we actually experience. It's an indicator more of when we took marijuana. And let me go on to Aha, I'm holding it backwards. And I'm not even stoned. God. Okay, now, all right, this is my favorite chart. Let's move away from this from the labs and theoretical studies and look what we actually have from accident data on the road. And this is really, I think, the acid test of all of this stuff. Do we find a lot of accidents caused by marijuana? Well, fortunately, there's a lot of studies been done on this. Here we've got about, 11 studies here covering tens of thousands of subjects. In fact, including every accident that's been recorded in the U.S. over a decade in the federal database have been analyzed. And in these studies, what they do, they look at people who've been in fatal accidents. They look what drugs are in their blood, alcohol, marijuana, other drugs. And then you try to look at which accidents seem like they're caused the fault of the driver and which were just sort of, a bad luck, and try to see whether those accidents where the driver is responsible, you see a higher incidence of drug use than in the other accidents. And doing so, you can calculate this thing called an odds ratio, which is like your increased odds of having an accident under the influence of that drug. Now, the ideal risk ratio, it's color-coded here, is in green, is on the order of 1. 1 is the standard for a drug-free driver. If you get up to risk ratios of 2 or 3, that's elevated. It's considered a moderate level. That's actually the level at which the odds ratio for people who have legal levels of alcohol in their blood, like around 0.05% blood alcohol, have this 2 to 3 risk factor. And the odds ratio of 5 or more in red is high risk, and that's what you see with drunken driving. The last two columns show the odds ratios from these various studies for, first of all, alcohol at levels of 0.08% or above. This is the legal standard for intoxication. High levels of alcohol is the first column. The second is for having THC in the blood. THC only, not THC and alcohol, because when you combine the two together, you get a high odds ratio. This is separating people who are only using marijuana from and comparing it to those who are under the influence of alcohol. And you will see in the alcohol column lots of red numbers. The odds ratios are on the order of 5 or 6. The THC column, there's an amazing number of results there on the order of 1 or even less. There's a few of the blue results in the moderate zone. There's only one study there that shows elevated, dangerous, high risk associated with THC. That's sort of the third one from the bottom there, the Australian study. And that study was different in that they distinguished drivers by the amount of THC in their blood. And those drivers who had specifically over 5 nanograms in their blood showed a high risk ratio comparable to that of drunken driving. There are other studies that point in the same direction, that when you get above 5 nanograms in the blood, indicating fairly recent use, you have a high probability of a higher risk of accidents. And this is where the proposals, like the one in Colorado, for setting a standard, a per se standard of 5 nanograms per milliliter specifically, come from. It's this kind of evidence. Well, let me just summarize where we are now. In general, urine tests are of no use at all. But when we look at THC in blood, if you just look at THC in blood and I don't tell you how much there is, that's sort of equivalent to a moderate risk, like alcohol after 1 or 2 drinks at legal levels. But if the THC is above 5 nanograms per milliliter, high chance that you're impaired. If it's less than or equal to 2 or 3, however, there's no increased risk, and the data is really good on this. So there's no basis for zero tolerance here. Let me say, though, after having said all this and told you about 5 nanograms, that there are exceptions to that. And there is, in fact, a case report in the literature of a patient with severe ADD who could not drive competently when straight, and then smoked marijuana, tested at 71 nanograms in blood, and drove fine. So it's dangerous pegging people to these numbers. A good ground for skepticism for taking just simple per se standards here. The final thing to note, of course, the combination of THC with alcohol has a high DUI risk. So what does this tell us about legalizing marijuana? What might happen? Well, you could have more accidents because more people are stoned drivers and they could be driving with alcohol, and that would be bad. Or if marijuana substituted for alcohol, on the other hand, you might have a lower incidence of accidents, in which case there would be no overall risk at all. So what is actually going on out there? Well, let me give you our opponent's scare response on this. This is a study that came up in the Prop 19 campaign by a guy named Al Crancer, who purported to show evidence that legalization through Prop 19 could make marijuana overtake alcohol as the major contributing factor in fatal crashes. What this is a graph of the incidence of drivers in fatal accidents in California who had THC in their blood. And you'll notice And the top line, by the way, is alcohol drivers. The green line is marijuana drivers. And you notice for many years there were only like 2% of all the drivers, fatal drivers, showed marijuana in their blood. And there was a sudden jump in 2004 when it went up to 4%, 4.5%, almost doubled. And it sort of stayed 4.5%, 5% since then. So here is this really sort of alarming jump that happens in 2004. Well, says Mr. Krancer, what happened in 2004? Well, that's when medical marijuana was legalized in California. Well, that's what he said in his study and in his press release. Of course, that's baloney. It was legalized in 1996. What did he mean? Well, I think he was referring to the Marijuana Policy Act that was passed in 2004. It was sort of the groundwork for our current dispensary system. That did pass in 2004. But there was no immediate increase in the availability of medical marijuana there. I mean, everybody's aware of the explosion in use that happened in Los Angeles and other parts of the state, in Southern California. That happened, however, in 2005 and 6. In 2004, there were only 4 small dispensaries in the entirety of Southern California. So it's very hard to see how that is due specifically to increased marijuana use. And in fact, this is only data from California. But Krancer told me that it sounds like that evidence from other states shows there's a similar increase going on in other states. So maybe this doesn't have anything to do with medical marijuana at all. Well, here, what actually happened in California during the same time to actual auto fatalities? Well, now there's really good news there. While this increased incidence of marijuana in drivers was noted, the actual fatality rate per million miles traveled in California went down. Okay? So what is all the alarm about? Is California really an unsafe place? Well, no. In fact, here is a ranking of all of the states according to traffic safety. The lower you are on this, the safer your roads are. This is accident rate per 100 million miles driven. As you can see in the right column, California is safer than average. It's 37th in the country. One of the safer states to drive in. Thank you, California Highway Patrol. In fact, if you look up seven notches from California, Colorado is 30th. Hey, the roads are safer here than an average, too. Now, I've indicated medical marijuana states in green and states that have decrim laws in blue. And you'll notice that there's a lot of green and blue states here in the safer half on the right. One major exception, of course, Montana. Montana's number one. Do we have any Montanans here? Yes. Well, let me say, this has nothing to do with marijuana. This is an old story about Montana is notorious for having the unsafest roads in the country. They were the last state to even adopt a speed limit. There weren't even very many medical marijuana dispensaries in Montana when this was taken in 2008. So on the whole, though, it looks really good for states that have liberal marijuana laws. And let me finally ask the big question, well, what happens if we legalize marijuana entirely? Surely that's a different scenario. That could really lead to dire results. Well, what could happen? Well, the best estimate of what happens if we legalize marijuana, the worst case from the RAND study of Proposition 19 was, legalizing California could lead to a doubling in marijuana use. A doubling. Well, we've been there before. In 1979 and 1980, the nation had the highest rate of marijuana use that we've ever had, and it was about double what it is now. So we've actually been to this place where everybody's afraid that we might go if we legalize marijuana. And what do the data show for that period? Well, here is the U.S. auto fatality rate, the entire United States, during the period when marijuana became popular and was legalized, was not legalized, was introduced to tens of millions of Americans in the late 1960s and the 1970s. During that period, while marijuana use was soaring, as you can see, the accident rate in the United States was declining, and it will continue to decline, I predict, if marijuana is legalized. Marijuana has no perceptible effect on overall death.
It's tough talking to kids about marijuana, especially if you might be a parent who dabbled a time or two in your youth. So to help you out, get your copy of Dr. Mitch Earlywine's latest book, A Parent's Guide to Marijuana. Dr. Earlywine is an associate professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and an expert on the studies concerning marijuana, its effect on health and society, and the methodology behind the statistics. He is a frequent guest here on our daily audio stash. Dr. Earlywine lays it all out without the propaganda and scare tactics that parents know won't work with teenagers. He presents a rational understanding of cannabis, what it is and what it isn't, and why kids shouldn't be using marijuana. You can order today through Amazon.com or check our links at our blog, stash.normal.org.
Been busted? Need a lawyer? Call the NORML Legal Committee for an attorney near you. Find one at NORML.org. Remember, attorneys are cheaper than a lifelong criminal drug record.
You want answers? I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical rant.
Well, earlier in the hemp headlines, we told you about Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, who is seeking input from the U.S. attorneys, the federal government, on whether or not they should move forward with their medical marijuana program. It was passed by initiative, 50.13% of the vote in Arizona last year. You know, it's funny how when it's immigration, Arizona Governor Jan Brewer claims, states' rights and no federal interference. But when it's a state voting for medical marijuana, she invites federal interference. She said that the letter from Dennis Burke, that U.S. Attorney for Arizona, was a warning to anyone who's involved, from patients and dispensary operators to landlords and even state health officials, that they could be prosecuted in federal court. Boo! See, that scare tactic seems to be working. Rhode Island balked, and Washington balked, and now Arizona, right? Despite the fact that this medical marijuana has been federally illegal the whole time, and New Mexico and Colorado have been licensing dispensaries for years with no federal interference. This is Brewer's quote, "I believe in the will of the people," Brewer said, even though she personally opposed the initiative. "Unfortunately, this piece of legislation, there are some pretty serious consequences if we don't get them resolved," she continued, "and I, as governor, am not willing to put those people at risk." And is it appropriate to call a woman, names? I don't know. That's just, I don't think so. But here we go. Bull! I say that is bull. Because, first of all, you oppose the initiative. And you're using this empty threat from the U.S. attorney to just provide you cover for overturning the will of what was really little more than half of the people's will in the first place. Don't tell me that you support the will of the people. Now, according to the East Valley Tribune, despite all of that, the state will continue issuing qualified patient cards to anyone who produces the required doctor certification that they have a medical condition that can be treated with marijuana. Gubernatorial press aide Matthew Benson said the state really has no choice. The initiative approved in November says if the state does not accept applications, then anyone who has the doctor's recommendation is automatically considered to have been issued a card. Now, that's some pretty clever language right there, and I have to give some props to the people at MPP that came up with that one, because what's going on here is they've made it so that there's a time limit. once the doctor issues the recommendation, the state has a clock ticking on them, 45 days, once the application's turned in, 45 days that they have to issue the card. And if they don't make that issuance within 45 days, then the doctor's recommendation is considered the legal card. So in a sense, if Governor Brewer here continues to oppose the program and decides not to issue any cards to anyone or halts the issuing of cards that are going on right now, then all that means is that everybody who gets a doctor's recommendation and waits for 46 days is a legal patient in the state of Arizona. You would think if Governor Brewer wanted to have some sort of control over what's going on in her medical marijuana program, she'd rather have it in the hands of a state agency controlling the issuance of those cards rather than every doctor in the state of Arizona. Now, I'm fine with it either way, but from her point of view, it would seem like what she's doing is counterproductive. Now, already we reported to you that about 4,000, it was like 3,600 Arizonans have the cards. They're certified under state law right now, and they can have up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana. Now, think about that. 3,600 patients. That's a pretty rapid growth curve right there. This initiative wasn't even officially passed until December. They had to do recounts and counts again. And the online-only registration system, you can only register online, that just opened 6 weeks ago. Right? With this kind of growth curve, we're talking over 30,000 patients in the first year in Arizona. Now, continuing on with the story, Brewer wants to know whether state officials who issue dispensary licenses can be prosecuted because they are, quote, facilitating the distribution of marijuana. And Brewer said she fears that the State Department of Public Safety could lose federal grants by refusing, as a matter of policy, to arrest those caught with the drug simply because they are complying with state law. Now you're reaching. Now you're really reaching, Governor Brewer. You can't name any one of the now 16 medical marijuana states that over the past 14 years has lost a single federal grant for not locking up patients. It just doesn't exist. And as for the dispensary licenses, well, you remember how much I complained about MPP's 25-mile halo part of the language? It said you couldn't grow at home if you lived within 25 miles of a dispensary? Well, if Brewer gets the answer we know she's going to get from the feds, which is, yeah, we can bust you for medical marijuana, then if she doesn't issue any dispensary licenses, that means every one of those patients can grow up to 12 plants in their home because they will all live more than 25 miles from dispensaries that don't exist. 4,000 patients now, 30,000 patients in a year, all growing a dozen plants at home. Again, you'd think if Governor Brewer was really going for some sort of control over medical marijuana, she'd implement this law and start issuing dispensary licenses and keep the vast majority of medical marijuana grown in licensed and regulated and secure facilities. But if she doesn't issue licenses, we're talking about 30,000 home grows. Maybe not that many. Some people might cooperate, but we're still talking tens of thousands of home grows. So, again, I'm cool with that too. You know, let my people grow. But Governor Brewer doesn't seem to be getting out of this what she thinks she will get out of this. You think the feds are going to come back and say, no, you don't issue licenses, and so suddenly the people won't use this law? No. They're going to continue to follow this law. They're going to get their recommendations. They're going to grow their 12 plants at home, and Arizona is going to just blossom as a medical marijuana state. Governor Brewer, this fight's over. We got 16 states now. The public supports us at 60, 70, sometimes 80% for the use of medical marijuana. It's time to get with the times and take that same bravado you use to fight federal immigration policy and claim states' rights. Take that same fight and back up your people and fight for the states' rights to implement their medical marijuana initiatives without federal interference. Don't invite that interference. That's counterproductive and counter to your role as governor.
This is NORML Show Live. The voice of the Marijuana Nation.
All right, folks, for Ganja John and Cannabis Carry, I'm Radical Russ for the NORML Foundation. Thanks for sticking around. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
You plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.